the early decades of the 19th century, when the southern states of America were built on cotton, chains, and cruelty, there existed a world that most history books prefer to forget. It was a world where human beings were bought, sold, traded, and punished like animals. A world where skin color decided your destiny before you even learned how to speak. In this world, freedom was a privilege reserved for a few, while suffering was the daily reality of millions. And hidden inside this system of injustice lived a man whose intelligence could have made him famous, wealthy, and respected in any fair society, but in his reality it only made him useful and invisible. He was born on a plantation owned by one of the richest families in the county. No birth certificate recorded his arrival. No doctor attended his mother. No priest blessed him. His first breath was taken in a wooden cabin with cracked walls and dirt floors. His mother was a field worker who labored from sunrise to sunset. His father, like many enslaved men, was sold away before he could remember his face. From his earliest days, he learned that love was temporary, safety was an illusion, and survival was the only goal. He watched grown men beaten for small mistakes. He saw women cry silently after being separated from their children. And he understood very early that the world he lived in was not designed for his happiness. Yet even as a child, he was different. While other children played when they could, he watched. While others spoke loudly, he listened. He noticed patterns in nature, in people, and routines. He memorized faces and voices without effort. He remembered who walked where, who spoke to whom, who avoided eye contact, who lied badly and who lied well. His mind was always working, even when his body was exhausted. The plantation overseer once noticed that the boy could repeat entire conversations word for word. Instead of praising him, the overseer warned others to keep him quiet. Intelligence in a slave was dangerous. Education was forbidden. Reading and writing were crimes. But knowledge still found its way to him. At night, he listened as white children practiced lessons. He memorized letters by watching chalk move on boards. He learned numbers by counting cotton sacks. He learned geography by listening to traders talk. He learned psychology by observing fear, slowly, without books, without teachers, without permission. He built an invisible library inside his mind. By the time he reached adulthood, he was assigned to work in the stables and warehouses. This position gave him access to travelers, merchants, messengers, and officials. He heard stories from distant towns. He learned about crimes, conflicts, and secrets. People spoke freely around him, believing he was nothing more than furniture that could breathe. They underestimated him, and that was his greatest advantage. The town itself was small but busy. It sat near a river used for trade. Merchants passed through. Farmers sold crops. Travelers stayed overnight. Where there was money, there was crime. Theft was common. Fights were frequent. Murders, though rare, shocked everyone. The local sheriff was respected for his authority but not his intelligence. He relied on brute force, intimidation, and luck. Many cases remained unsolved. Victims lost faith. Criminals grew bold. Everything began to change after one strange night. A shipment of expensive tools disappeared from a warehouse. Guards swore no one had entered. Locks were intact, windows were closed. The sheriff was humiliated. He questioned everyone. He threatened everyone. He arrested 2 innocent men. Nothing worked. Frustrated, he ordered the slave from the stables to clean the warehouse. As the man swept the floor, he noticed details others had ignored. Slight scratch marks near a door hinge. Dust disturbed in a narrow path. A loose nail. Footprints half erased. He realized someone had entered from inside, not outside. He quietly mentioned this to a deputy. The deputy laughed, not until he checked and saw it was true. Following those clues led them to a clerk who had copied a key and staged the theft. The case was solved in 2 days. Officially, the sheriff took credit. Unofficially, something changed. From that night on, whenever a case became difficult, someone would quietly fetch him. Always in secret, always at night, always without witnesses. He was brought to crime scenes after dark. He studied them silently. He spoke little. When he did, he spoke carefully. He knew that one wrong word could cost him his life. He never demanded credit. He never asked for rewards. He knew better. Survival depended on obedience. But inside, he carried a heavy burden. The knowledge that he was saving lives and delivering justice for a society that denied his humanity. He lived two lives. By day, he was just another slave, hauling goods, cleaning stables, following orders, lowering his eyes. By night, he was a detective before the word even existed. He reconstructed crimes in his mind like stories. He imagined movements, motives, emotions. He understood that criminals were not monsters. They were people driven by fear, greed, love, or desperation. This understanding allowed him to predict behavior. He knew where suspects would hide. He knew who would panic. He knew who would confess under pressure and who would remain silent. Yet, he remained nameless. Newspapers praised the sheriff. Politicians congratulated law enforcement. Citizens felt safer. No one asked who was really doing the thinking. Sometimes he stood at the edge of crowds listening to speeches about justice, knowing he was the unseen foundation of every word. Loneliness became his companion. He could not share his thoughts. He could not teach others. He could not write his story. If he spoke too much, he risked punishment. If he showed pride, he risked death. So he hid himself behind calm silence. At night in his small cabin, he replayed cases in his head. He wondered what his life might have been if he had been born free. He imagined wearing a badge, holding books, teaching children, traveling, choosing his own path. These dreams were dangerous, so he buried them deep. But dreams do not die easily. Even in chains, his mind remained free, and unknowingly, he was preparing the ground for a legacy that history would try and fail to erase. Because stories like his do not disappear. They wait. As weeks turned into months after the warehouse case, something subtle but powerful began to shift inside the small southern town. People did not notice it at first. Life continued as usual. Farmers worked their fields. Merchants counted their profits. Slaves labored in silence. The sheriff still walked proudly through the streets with his badge, shining in the sun. Newspapers still printed his name in bold letters. But behind closed doors, inside dimly lit offices and whispered conversations, a new reality was forming. The sheriff had discovered that his authority meant nothing without intelligence. And intelligence was something he did not possess. It belonged to a man he legally owned no respect for, yet secretly depended on. At first, the sheriff resisted this truth. Like most men raised in power, he believed his position made him superior. He told himself that the warehouse case had been luck. A coincidence, a fluke. He promised himself he would never again rely on a slave. But reality had other plans. Within weeks, another crime struck the town. A traveling merchant reported that his money chest had been stolen from his locked room at an inn. No signs of forced entry. No broken windows. No witnesses. The sheriff followed his usual method. He questioned loudly. He threatened harshly. He arrested randomly. Nothing worked. The merchant demanded justice. The town began to whisper. Pressure grew. Late one night, frustrated and exhausted, the sheriff made a decision he would never admit publicly. He sent a deputy to quietly bring the man from the stables. When the slave entered the office, he lowered his eyes as always. He stood silently. He did not speak unless spoken to. The sheriff placed the evidence on the table. A broken latch, a torn cloth, a muddy shoe print. The man examined them slowly. He touched nothing without permission. He studied every detail as if reading a hidden language. Then, in a calm voice, he explained that the thief had likely entered through the roof, used a copied key, and escaped through the back alley. He pointed out that the shoe print matched a worker at the inn who limped slightly. The sheriff followed the lead. The worker confessed within hours. From that night on, denial became impossible. The sheriff realized he was sitting on a secret weapon, a mind sharper than any knife, more powerful than any gun. But this weapon came with a risk. If people discovered the truth, his authority would crumble. The idea that a slave was solving crimes would shake the foundation of everything he represented. So he built a system of secrecy. The man was never summoned in daylight. He was never seen at crime scenes. He never spoke in public. He entered through back doors and left through alleys. Deputies were warned to remain silent. Records were altered. Reports were rewritten. All credit went upward. All blame went downward. Slowly, the slave became an invisible member of law enforcement. He was consulted before arrests. He was asked about suspects. He was used to test alibis. He analyzed testimonies. He noticed contradictions. He sensed fear in voices. He understood when someone was hiding something. Years of observing oppression had made him an expert in human behavior. He knew how people reacted under pressure because he lived under it every day. With each solved case, trust grew. Not trust in the human sense, no friendship, no equality, but professional dependence. The sheriff began delaying decisions until he had consulted him. Deputies started whispering, "What does he think?" before acting. Some officers resented this. They felt threatened. They hated the idea that someone they considered inferior was outperforming them. A few tried to sabotage him. They hid evidence. They lied. They tried to trap him into mistakes. But his discipline protected him. He never rushed. He never guessed. He only spoke when certain. Soon criminals noticed a change. Crimes that once went unsolved were now closed quickly. Hideouts were discovered. Fake alibis collapsed. Informants were exposed. Escape routes were blocked. The town developed a reputation. You can't get away with anything here anymore. No one knew why. Rumors spread. Some said the sheriff had special training. Others claimed he had secret contacts. A few whispered about supernatural help. Only a handful knew the truth, and they were too afraid to say it. For the slave, this secret life came at a cost. His workload doubled. He worked full days in physical labor, then spent nights analyzing crimes. He slept little. He ate poorly. Stress became constant. Yet he never complained. Complaining was dangerous. Weakness invited punishment. Sometimes he was summoned after brutal days in the fields. His hands would still be bleeding. His body would still be shaking from exhaustion. Yet he was expected to think clearly, to solve puzzles, to save reputations. And he did. Because failure was not an option. If he failed, he would be blamed. If he succeeded, others would be praised. Still, he continued, he developed methods without knowing their names. He practiced early forensic thinking. He compared handwriting. He examined soil types. He studied weather patterns. He memorized travel routes. He created mental maps of the town. He tracked social relationships. He understood that crimes were rarely random. They followed invisible networks of motive and opportunity. The sheriff began to fear losing him, not emotionally, but strategically. He made sure the man was well fed compared to others. He protected him from extreme punishment. He assigned him lighter physical tasks when possible. These were not acts of kindness. They were investments. The man understood this. He knew his value. But value did not equal freedom. There were moments when the sheriff almost acknowledged him. Once, after solving a complex murder involving forged documents and multiple suspects, the sheriff looked at him and said quietly, "You're smarter than all of us." For a second, hope flickered. Then the sheriff added, "Don't forget your place." And the moment died. Despite everything, the man never stopped believing in justice. Not the justice of courts and laws, those were corrupted, but moral justice. Right and wrong. Truth and lies. He believed that victims deserved answers, that families deserved closure, that innocence mattered, even in a cruel world. This belief kept him going. He was not serving the sheriff. He was serving truth. Over time, his reputation spread quietly among criminals. They spoke of an unseen mind, a silent judge, someone who could see through lies. Some criminals refused to operate in the town. Others fled after one mistake. A few tried to identify him. None succeeded. He remained a ghost. Yet inside, he was changing. With every solved case, he gained confidence. With every manipulation, he gained awareness. He learned the weaknesses of the system. He saw how evidence was twisted, how confessions were forced, how justice was shaped by power. This knowledge would one day become dangerous. But for now, he stayed silent, because survival came first. And the sheriff, without realizing it, had built his empire on the mind of a man he refused to recognize. By the time the town entered its third year under the sheriff's quiet partnership with the unseen investigator, something remarkable had happened. Crime no longer felt random. Chaos no longer ruled. Fear no longer spread unchecked. People slept more easily. Merchants traveled with confidence. Families felt safer walking after sunset. On the surface, it appeared as though strong leadership had transformed the community. Newspapers praised firm law. Enforcement, politicians, spoke of moral order. Visitors admired the town's stability, but beneath this polished image lay a hidden truth. Every major success rested on the silent work of a man whose name was never spoken aloud in public. The first case that truly shook the town began on a rainy autumn evening. A respected landowner named Thomas Whitfield was found dead in his study, slumped over his desk with a bullet wound in his chest. The doors were locked from inside. The windows were bolted. No weapon was found. His wife claimed she had been asleep. His servants swore they heard nothing. The scene made no sense. Rumors exploded overnight. Some claimed it was suicide. Others whispered about political enemies. A few blamed runaway slaves. Panic spread. Whitfield had been powerful. If he could be killed so easily, no one was safe. The sheriff and his deputies were helpless. They searched the house repeatedly and found nothing new. Witnesses contradicted themselves. No motive was clear. Pressure from influential families mounted. The sheriff feared humiliation. Late at night, he summoned the man. When he entered the study, he moved slowly as if listening to the room itself. He examined the walls, the desk, the floor, the fireplace, the bookshelves. He noticed something no one else had. A faint burn mark on the curtain, almost invisible in daylight. He traced it back to a candle stand that had been moved. He realized someone had staged the room. The bullet angle was wrong for suicide. The lack of weapon was deliberate. He studied the wife's testimony and noticed hesitation when mentioning a business partner. Within 2 days, the truth emerged. Whitfield had been killed by his closest associate during a heated argument. The man had staged the scene to look like suicide. He was arrested and confessed. The town was stunned, not because justice was served, because it had been served so quickly. Soon after, another case tested his abilities even further. A string of burglaries targeted wealthy homes. Safes were opened without damage. Guards were bypassed. Dogs were poisoned. The thief left no fingerprints, no witnesses, no patterns. Weeks passed. Losses mounted. Insurance companies threatened to withdraw coverage. Merchants considered moving away. The sheriff grew desperate. Again, the man was called. He studied every burglary report. He memorized times, locations, weather conditions, and victim profiles. He noticed something subtle. Every home targeted had recently hosted social gatherings. He suspected someone who attended these events. He cross-referenced guest lists. One name appeared repeatedly: a traveling piano tuner. No one suspected him. He was polite, quiet, seemed harmless. But the man noticed inconsistencies in his schedule. A trap was set. The tuner was caught in the act. He had memorized floor plans during visits. Another legend was born. Then came the disappearance of little Sarah Miller. She was 8 years old. She vanished while walking home from school. Search parties scoured forests and rivers. No trace was found. Her mother collapsed in grief. The town descended into despair. Accusations flew. Some blamed strangers. Others blamed minorities. Violence threatened to erupt. The sheriff feared a riot. Once more, he turned to his secret ally. The man studied Sarah's routine. Her friends, her teachers, her neighbors. He noticed she often stopped near an old abandoned mill to feed birds. He inspected the area and found a broken twig, disturbed soil, and fabric caught on a nail. He followed the trail. It led to a lonely fisherman who lived nearby. The man had lured Sarah with promises of candy. She was rescued alive. The town wept with relief, but never knew whom to thank. Over the years, cases became more complex. A counterfeit money ring, an arsonist burning barns, a poisoner targeting rivals, a smuggling network using riverboats. Each time he unraveled the mystery. He learned to read financial records. He studied shipping logs. He memorized river currents. He decoded symbols. He predicted crimes before they happened. Criminals began making mistakes because fear clouded judgment. They knew someone was watching. They didn't know who. One of the most dangerous cases involved a corrupt deputy. Evidence was disappearing. Witnesses were recanting. Suspects were escaping. The sheriff suspected sabotage but had no proof. The man analyzed patterns and failed arrests. He noticed all compromise cases involved the same officer. He arranged a false lead. The deputy took the bait. He was exposed, quietly dismissed. No scandal. No headlines. The system protected itself. Another case involved a serial killer targeting travelers. Bodies were found near the river. Different weapons, different locations, no obvious connection. Most believed they were unrelated. The man disagreed. He noticed similarities in timing and injury patterns. He linked them to a ferry operator. The man was arrested. Dozens of potential victims were saved. Still, silence remained. With each solved crime, the man grew more isolated. He carried memories of victims, faces of grieving families, screams, confessions, deaths. These haunted him. But he had no one to share them with. No therapist, no friend, no journal. Only silence. He became older, tired. His hair grayed early. Wrinkles formed, but his mind remained sharp. Young deputies unknowingly learned from his methods. They copied his logic without knowing its source. His influence spread invisibly. By now, criminals avoided the town entirely. It became known as the place where nothing stays hidden. Yet history recorded none of his victories, only official names, only false heroes. But truth cannot stay buried forever. Every solved case left a trace. Every diary entry, every whispered confession, every hidden letter, all pieces waiting to be found. And one day they would be, as the years passed and the town continued to prosper under the illusion of perfect law and order. Something darker began to grow beneath the surface. It was not crime. It was not chaos. It was fear. Fear among powerful men who understood, perhaps better than anyone else, that their authority rested on a lie. They knew that the foundation of their success was not their intelligence, their courage, or their leadership. It was the silent brilliance of a man they called property, and that truth, if revealed, would destroy everything they claimed to stand for. In a society built on slavery, admitting that an enslaved man was more intelligent than judges, lawyers, and officers was unthinkable. It would challenge the entire moral system that justified oppression. Plantation owners argued that black people were inferior. Politicians claimed slavery was necessary. Preachers twisted scripture to defend cruelty. Newspapers printed lies as facts. All of this propaganda depended on one dangerous assumption: that slaves were naturally less capable. The existence of this man shattered that myth. He was living proof that the system was based on fraud. That was why his name had to disappear. From the beginning, officials made sure that no document ever mentioned him. Arrest reports credited deputies. Court records praised investigators. Newspaper articles glorified the sheriff. Even private letters were carefully worded. When someone accidentally referred to the stable worker, editors removed the phrase. When witnesses mentioned him, their statements were shortened. History was being edited in real time. The sheriff himself struggled internally. He knew the truth. He knew who deserved credit. But he also knew that acknowledging it would end his career. He would be ridiculed, disgraced, possibly removed from office. Other officials would turn against him. Wealthy donors would withdraw support. The political machine would crush him. So he chose silence. Over time, silence became habit. Habit became policy. Policy became tradition. New sheriffs inherited the secret. Trusted deputies were informed privately. Everyone else was kept in the dark. The system functioned like a hidden engine. As long as it worked, no one asked questions. The man himself was never consulted about recognition. No one asked whether he wanted his name recorded. No one offered him a choice. He was expected to be grateful for protection and food. Gratitude was demanded instead of justice. There were moments when exposure nearly happened. Once, a young reporter arrived from a nearby city. He noticed inconsistencies in police reports. He interviewed witnesses who hinted at an unnamed advisor. He began asking uncomfortable questions. The sheriff panicked. He invited the reporter to dinner, offered him exclusive interviews, gave him false leads. Eventually, the reporter left with a harmless story about excellent leadership. Another time, a judge privately suggested mentioning the man in court. The sheriff warned him that doing so would cause unnecessary trouble. The judge backed down. Fear won again. Some deputies hated this secrecy. They admired the man. They felt ashamed. A few secretly tried to teach him reading and writing. Others slipped him books. These small rebellions were acts of respect. But they were dangerous. If discovered, punishment followed. Even among slaves, his intelligence was risky. Some were proud of him. Others feared he would bring attention. Attention meant crackdowns, restrictions, violence. So even within his own community, silence was sometimes safer. The man learned early that fame was forbidden. Recognition was a threat. He watched others receive medals, promotions, praise. He watched ceremonies from afar. He listened to speeches celebrating justice. He remained invisible, not because he lacked value, because he had too much. The system also feared what he might become if empowered. Education would make him unstoppable. Freedom would make him dangerous. Influence would inspire others. So they kept him limited, restricted, dependent, controlled. Every privilege was conditional. Every favor could be withdrawn. Every mistake could be fatal. This psychological cage was as powerful as physical chains. Yet he never rebelled openly, not because he accepted injustice, but because he was strategic. He understood timing. He knew survival required patience. He gathered knowledge quietly. He memorized laws. He learned politics. He studied power structures. He saw how institutions protected themselves. This understanding would later help historians decode his story. After the Civil War, when slavery officially ended, many records were destroyed. Some burned intentionally, others disappeared. Courthouses lost files. Newspapers revised archives. Families hid diaries. They wanted to erase proof of hypocrisy, proof that enslaved people had built not only wealth but justice itself. For decades, his name remained lost. Generations grew up believing false heroes. Textbooks repeated lies. Monuments honored the wrong men. Meanwhile, descendants of victims unknowingly owed their safety to a forgotten soul. Only in private did truth survive. In whispered stories. In family legends. In faded letters. In margins of notebooks. A deputy's grandson once found a journal describing the quiet genius in chains. A clerk's daughter preserved letters mentioning the man who sees everything. A retired judge confessed on his deathbed that most verdicts depended on him. These fragments slowly surfaced. Scholars began connecting dots. Patterns emerged. A shadow figure appeared in multiple accounts, always unnamed, always crucial, always erased. The realization was shocking. An entire system had collaborated to delete one man from memory, not accidentally, deliberately, because acknowledging him meant admitting guilt. Guilt for exploitation, guilt for theft of credit, guilt for stolen humanity. His erasure was not neglect. It was strategy, a crime committed by history itself. And like all crimes, it would eventually be investigated, long after the man's footsteps had faded from the dusty roads of the small southern town, long after his quiet voice had disappeared from the sheriff's office, long after his worn hands had stopped turning pages and tracing clues. Something remained. It was not written in stone. It was not carved into monuments. It was not preserved in official records. It existed in something far more powerful and far more dangerous to false history: memory. Memory does not obey orders. It does not respect censorship. It does not forget simply because powerful people want it to. And slowly, patiently, memory began to bring him back. For many years after his death, the town continued telling the same old stories, the same heroic tales of brave sheriffs, the same exaggerated accounts of brilliant officers, the same false legends passed from generation to generation. Children learned these stories in school. Tourists heard them during guided walks. Newspapers repeated them on anniversaries. No one questioned them. Why would they? They fit perfectly into the comfortable version of history people preferred to believe. But beneath these polished narratives, small cracks began to form. An old woman once told her grandson that when she was a child, her father used to say, "If you really want to know who keeps this town safe, look toward the stables at night." The boy did not understand then. Years later, he would remember those words and wonder what they meant. A retired deputy, drunk and near death, once whispered to a nurse, "We stole his life and called it order." She wrote it down in her notebook, confused by the sentence, not knowing it was a confession. A forgotten box in an attic contained letters written by a clerk who had worked at the courthouse. In them, he described the quiet man who solved more cases than all of us combined. His family kept the letters, unsure of their importance. These fragments drifted through time like scattered puzzle pieces. No one connected them. Not yet. Decades later, in the early 20th century, a young historian named William Carter arrived in the region to study local crime records. He was interested in why such a small town had such an unusually high rate of solved cases during the slavery era. On paper, it made no sense. Other towns struggled. This one did not. The statistics were strange. The timelines were too efficient. The methods seemed advanced for their time. Carter suspected something was missing. He spent years digging through dusty archives. He interviewed elderly residents. He searched private collections. He read diaries no one had opened in decades. Slowly, patterns emerged. Certain phrases repeated. Certain unnamed references appeared again and again. The helper, the stable man, the quiet one, him, always him, never a name. Carter realized he was chasing a ghost. But ghostly footprints. He discovered that in nearly every major case, a mysterious consultation occurred shortly before the breakthrough, meetings late at night, unrecorded visits, unexplained delays followed by sudden solutions. It was as if an invisible hand guided investigations. Then came the breakthrough. In the attic of a former deputy's granddaughter, Carter found a leather-bound notebook. Inside were detailed observations about crimes, written in simple but brilliant language. The handwriting was careful, precise. The logic was extraordinary. At the back of the notebook, one sentence stood out. "He is smarter than all of us, but we pretend he is nothing." That sentence changed everything. Further research revealed that the notebook belonged to the man himself. He had secretly taught himself to write. He had recorded his thoughts in fragments, knowing they might one day matter. Carter published his findings. At first, no one believed him. Officials dismissed it as speculation. Local leaders called it an insult. Some accused him of rewriting history. Others said he was seeking attention. But evidence kept growing. More documents surfaced. More families came forward. More private confessions were recorded. A forgotten hero began to take shape. Universities took interest. Scholars analyzed his methods. They compared his reasoning to modern criminology. The results were shocking. He had independently developed techniques decades before. They were formally recognized. Behavioral profiling, pattern analysis, environmental evidence, timeline reconstruction, all without formal education. He had been a pioneer. In chains, public opinion slowly shifted. Articles were written, documentaries were produced, books were published. Museums created exhibits. The town was forced to confront its past. Some residents felt ashamed. Others felt angry. A few felt relieved. Truth, even when painful, can be freeing. A memorial was proposed. At first, it faced resistance. Some argued it would reopen old wounds. Others said it would damage the town's image. But supporters insisted that wounds never heal if they are hidden. Eventually, a small monument was built near the old courthouse. It did not list his name, because historians were still debating it. It simply read, "To the man whose mind brought justice when the law could not." People began leaving flowers. Students visited. Teachers told his story. His legacy finally entered public consciousness. But perhaps the most powerful change happened quietly. Young black children in the region began learning about him. They saw themselves reflected in his story. They saw intelligence, resilience, dignity. They learned that their ancestors were not just victims. They were innovators, thinkers, leaders, builders of society. His life became a symbol, not of suffering alone, but of stolen potential, of what is lost when talent is suppressed, of how much progress was delayed by prejudice. His story also changed law enforcement. Training programs referenced his methods. Ethics courses discussed his exploitation. Departments acknowledged past injustices. Some offered scholarships in his honor, slow steps but meaningful. In modern times, digital archives made his story accessible worldwide. Millions watched videos, listened to podcasts, read articles, comment sections filled with disbelief and admiration. How did this happen? Why wasn't he recognized sooner? Why do we always learn too late? The same questions echoed across generations. Yet his legacy was not about blame. It was about responsibility. Responsibility to question official stories. Responsibility to listen to hidden voices. Responsibility to honor truth, even when inconvenient. His life proved that greatness does not require permission, that brilliance can survive in darkness, that justice can be born in injustice, that dignity can exist in degradation. He never wore a badge, never received a medal, never stood on a stage, but he shaped history, silently, relentlessly, honestly. Today, when visitors walk through the town, they see plaques and exhibits. They hear guides mention the invisible detective. They learn about the man who outthought a system designed to crush him. And somewhere, in the collective memory of humanity, he finally stands free. Not as property, not as a secret, not as a shadow, but as what he always was, a genius, a guardian, a hero.